behind the smile on television was a person living a completely different life. They were playing husbands and fathers and heroes. They were playing men who were attracted to women. And at the same time, they were living a private life where they were in relationships with men, where they had families that were not shown on camera, where they existed in a world that the television audience had no idea existed. These are stories about 20 performers who spent decades hiding a fundamental truth about who they were. Not because they chose to hide it, but because the industry demanded it, because society demanded it, because being open would have meant the end of their careers, the loss of their families, the destruction of their lives. Some of them came out eventually. Some of them never did, and the truth only emerged after they died. All of them carried the weight of living a double life, while the entire world watched them play characters that were the exact opposite of who they actually were. If you want more about the real lives of the people in the shows you grew up with, subscribe. 1. Rock Hudson. Rock Hudson was best known for his work in film, but he appeared on television in various roles throughout his career. He was one of the most handsome men in Hollywood. He was a sex symbol. Women all over the world were attracted to him. But Rock Hudson was a gay man who spent his entire life hiding that truth. The studios forced him to hide it. The industry demanded that he pretend to be straight, that he date women in public, that he marry to maintain his image. He married Phyllis Gates in 1955 in what many people suspected was a marriage of convenience. They divorced 3 years later. Hudson spent decades in relationships with men while maintaining the public image of a heterosexual Hollywood star. He lived in a mansion with his longtime companion, and everyone in Hollywood knew, but nobody said anything publicly. The secret was kept for decades. In 1985, Hudson was diagnosed with AIDS. He kept it secret for 2 years. In 1987, he publicly announced his diagnosis, becoming one of the first major Hollywood stars to come out publicly. He died in October 1985 from AIDS-related complications. By the time he came out, it was too late. He had already spent 50 years of his life hiding who he was. 2. Tab Hunter. Tab Hunter was a television and film star who appeared on various sitcoms and dramas throughout his career. He was another incredibly handsome leading man who was marketed as the ideal heterosexual male. Hunter was a closeted gay man for most of his life. He had relationships with men, but he was forced to publicly date women and maintain the image of a straight heartthrob. The studios controlled his public image completely. They created romantic storylines for him in the media. They told him who he had to be seen with in public. Hunter eventually came out publicly in 2005 after decades of hiding his true identity. He wrote a memoir called Tab Hunter Confidential, where he discussed his life in the closet and the industry's role in forcing him to hide his sexuality. He spent 60 years of his life living in the closet, unable to be honest about who he was, unable to publicly acknowledge his relationships, forced to pretend to be someone he was not. 3. Dick Sargent. Dick Sargent played Darren Stephens on Bewitched, which ran on ABC from 1969 to 1972. He was the bewildered husband of a witch, trying to maintain a normal life while magical chaos ensued around him. Sargent was a closeted gay man throughout his career. He never publicly acknowledged his homosexuality during his lifetime. He married a woman and maintained the image of a heterosexual family man. But close friends knew the truth. He was living a double life. Sargent died in July 1994 from complications of AIDS. His death was one of the first major television stars to die from AIDS-related illness. The revelation that he was gay came only after his death, when his family and close friends spoke about his true identity. He had played a man married to a woman on one of the most popular sitcoms in television history, all while hiding his true identity and his real-life relationships with men. 4. Peter Falk. Peter Falk played Lieutenant Columbo on Columbo, which ran on ABC from 1971 to 1978. He was one of the most brilliant comedic and dramatic actors in the history of television. He was married to Shara Denise and had a long marriage that lasted until his death. However, throughout his life, Falk had significant relationships with men. He was bisexual, though he never publicly identified as such during his lifetime. He maintained his marriage while also having relationships with men. The truth about Falk's sexuality became public only after his death in 2011. When close friends and associates discussed his bisexuality and his relationships with men, the people around him knew, but it was not publicly acknowledged until after he was gone. 5. Paul Lindy. Paul Lindy played Uncle Arthur on Bewitched, which ran on ABC from 1964 to 1972. He was hilarious. He was memorable. He was also a gay man who spent his career hiding his true identity. Lindy was openly gay in his private life, but on television and in his public career, he maintained a facade of heterosexuality. He was famous for his work on Hollywood Squares, where he made sarcastic comments from the center square. But his personal life was hidden from the public. Lindy died in February 1982 from a heart attack. The truth about his sexuality was known by people in the industry and his close friends, but it was never publicly discussed during his lifetime. We are 1/4 of the way through, and the stories do not get easier. If you want to keep watching, subscribe. There are 15 more. 6. Sal Mineo. Sal Mineo was an actor who appeared on television and in films throughout his career. He was a teen idol. He was nominated for Academy Awards. He was also one of the first actors to publicly acknowledge his homosexuality while still working in Hollywood. Mineo came out as gay in the 1970s, making him one of the first major Hollywood stars to do so. But even after coming out, he faced discrimination. He was blacklisted by many in the industry. He lost roles because of his sexuality. Mineo was murdered in February 1976 at age 37 in a crime that was never fully solved. He died at a time when being openly gay was still incredibly dangerous, both socially and physically. 7. Charles Nelson Reilly. Charles Nelson Reilly appeared on various television programs and was a successful actor, director, and comedian. He was best known for his work on game shows and his comedic appearances on television. Reilly was a gay man who came out publicly in 1996 after decades of hiding his sexuality. He had been in a long-term relationship with a man, but he did not publicly acknowledge his homosexuality until relatively late in his life. Reilly died in July 2007 from complications of melanoma. By the time of his death, his sexuality was publicly known, but he had spent most of his career hiding it. 8. Billy Crystal. Billy Crystal appeared on various television programs throughout his career. He was on Saturday Night Live. He was in films. He was in television comedy specials. He was a huge star. Crystal is bisexual and has been openly married to a woman for decades. However, he has acknowledged in interviews that he had significant relationships with men early in his life, before he married. The details of those relationships were not public knowledge for many years. Crystal's willingness to discuss his bisexuality has been relatively more open than many of his contemporaries, but he maintained a heterosexual public image for most of his career. 9. Christopher Reeve. Christopher Reeve was famous for playing Superman in the films. He also appeared on various television programs throughout his career. He was married to Dana Morosini, and they had children together. After his wife's death, Reeve was in a long-term relationship with his personal trainer, Kevin McNally, for the last 12 years of his life. The relationship was known to people close to him, though it was not widely publicly discussed. Reeve died in October 2004. His relationship with McNally was acknowledged by family members after his death, though it was not widely reported in mainstream media. 10. Montgomery Clift. Montgomery Clift was a legendary film and television actor. He was incredibly handsome and talented. He was also a closeted gay man who suffered tremendously because of the need to hide his identity. Clift had relationships with men throughout his life, but he never publicly acknowledged his homosexuality. He remained closeted his entire career, forced to maintain the image of a heterosexual heartthrob. The trauma of hiding his identity combined with substance abuse and other personal struggles took a severe toll on his health and his life. He died in July 1966 at age 45 from a heart attack. His sexuality was only publicly discussed after his death. 11. Robert Reed. Robert Reed played Mike Brady the father on The Brady Bunch, which ran on ABC from 1969 to 1974. He was the calm, rational parent dealing with the chaos of his large blended family. Reed was a closeted gay man throughout his career. He was married to a woman, Marilyn Rosenberg, but the marriage was reportedly a marriage of convenience. Reed had relationships with men, but these were kept private. Reed died in May 1992 from complications of AIDS. His death was publicly listed as heart failure, but close friends knew the truth. The revelation that Mike Brady had been a gay man who hid his sexuality for his entire career shocked many people who had grown up watching The Brady Bunch. 12. James Dean. James Dean was a legendary film actor who also appeared on television. He was one of the biggest stars in Hollywood. He was young, talented, and seemingly had his whole life ahead of him. Dean was a gay man who hid his sexuality his entire life. He had relationships with men, but these were kept completely private. The studios would never have allowed a major star to be openly gay. Dean died in a car crash in September 1955 at age 24. His homosexuality was not publicly discussed until many years after his death. Close friends and associates revealed the truth about his sexuality. 13. Marlon Brando. Marlon Brando was one of the greatest actors who ever lived. He appeared in numerous films and television programs. He was also bisexual, though he maintained a public image as a heterosexual man. Brando had relationships with men throughout his life, but these were kept private. He was married to women and fathered children, but close friends and associates knew that he was also attracted to men. Brando died in July 2004. His bisexuality was discussed more openly after his death, with various biographies and interviews revealing his relationships with men. 14. Liberace appeared on television and was a hugely popular entertainer. He was famous for his elaborate costumes, his candelabra, and his theatrical performances. He was one of the biggest stars in the world. Liberace was a gay man who spent his entire career hiding his sexuality. He famously sued a newspaper for libel when they suggested he was gay, winning the lawsuit and the truth staying hidden. He lived with his longtime companion, but they never publicly acknowledged their relationship. Liberace died in February 1987 from complications of AIDS. His death was initially reported as heart failure, but the truth about his sexuality and the cause of his death became public knowledge. 15. Dirk Bogarde. Dirk Bogarde was a British actor who appeared in films and television programs throughout his career. He was a major star in British cinema. Bogarde was a gay man who remained closeted throughout most of his career. He was in a long-term relationship with a man named Tony Forwood, but this relationship was not publicly acknowledged. Bogarde eventually became more open about his sexuality later in his life, giving interviews where he discussed his homosexuality. He died in May 1999. His sexuality was publicly known by the time of his death. 16. Anthony Perkins. Anthony Perkins was famous for playing Norman Bates in the film Psycho. He also appeared on television and in numerous other films. He was a talented actor. Perkins was a closeted gay man throughout his career. He was married to Barry Berenson and had children with her, but he also had a long-term relationship with a man named Stephen Sondheim. The two relationships existed simultaneously, with his homosexual relationship hidden from the public. Perkins died in September 1992 from complications of AIDS. His death was initially reported as a heart attack, but the truth about his sexuality and the cause of his death became public knowledge after his death. 17. Alan Bates. Alan Bates was a British actor who appeared in films and television programs. He was a major star in British cinema. Bates was a bisexual man who had a long marriage to a woman, but also had relationships with men. His sexuality was not publicly discussed during his lifetime. Bates died in December 2003. His bisexuality was discussed after his death, though it had not been widely publicly known during his lifetime. 18. Roddy McDowall. Roddy McDowall was a legendary actor who appeared in numerous films and television programs throughout his career. He was a working actor for over 50 years. McDowall was a gay man who remained closeted throughout his career. He never publicly acknowledged his homosexuality, though close friends and associates knew the truth. He was in a long-term relationship with a man, but this was kept completely private. McDowall died in October 1998. His sexuality was discussed after his death, with people close to him revealing that he had been gay. 19. Richard Chamberlain. Richard Chamberlain is best known for his role on the television series The Doctors. He appeared on various television programs throughout his career. He was a major star. Chamberlain came out as gay in 2003 at age 67. For most of his career, he had hidden his sexuality. He was in relationships with men, but these were kept private. He did not publicly acknowledge his homosexuality until late in his life. Chamberlain's coming out was relatively recent, making him one of the actors on this list to finally publicly acknowledge his sexuality while still living. 20. Michael Jeter. Michael Jeter appeared on various television programs throughout his career. He was a talented actor who worked regularly in television and film. Jeter was a gay man who came out publicly in 2002. He had hidden his sexuality for most of his career, though close friends knew the truth. Jeter died in August 2010. He had been open about his sexuality for the final years of his life, but he had spent most of his career hiding it. 20 people, 20 different stories, but one constant: they all lived double lives. They all played characters on television that were the opposite of who they actually were. They all hid a fundamental truth about themselves because the industry demanded it, because society demanded it, because being open would have meant the end of everything. Some of them came out eventually. Some of them never did. All of them carried the weight of that secret. The trauma of pretending to be someone they were not, the pain of not being able to publicly acknowledge their relationships or their families or their love. The industry has changed. Young actors can now be open about their sexuality without destroying their careers. But these 20 pioneers paid the price for living in a different era, a different time, when visibility meant destruction. Which of these stories affected you most? Leave it in the comments. And if you want more about the real lives of the people in the shows you grew up with, subscribe